Hey guys, it's Valine, and I'm excited to start a series called Join the Conversation, where we'll have a chance to talk about various topics. And I want to encourage you to have a conversation with your friends and family too. In these next few episodes, we'll be talking about a tough issue. Have you ever felt like it's weird to talk to people about race, racism, and racial tension? Me too. I want to encourage you to join me and my friends Julia, Allison, and Thomas on the topic of race. To talk about some questions on this topic. And so we'll be doing that right now, and we'll get started with introductions of ourselves. So my name is Valine, and I have grown up here in Phoenix, and so it's a relatively diverse community. I think just a lot of Hispanics. When I was growing up, I was usually the only Asian kid in class, and so that I did experience racism a little bit as the only Asian kid. It was usually like the squinty eye jokes or the ching chong, ding dong, like making fun of the language. And I don't even speak the language. Like I don't speak Chinese. I can order some food because, obviously I know the names of food because that's important to me. But other than that, like I really don't understand the language. If you dropped me off in China, I'd be completely lost. But like that's kind of been my experience, is just being different looking and a different color. But yeah, I will let you guys introduce yourselves and some of your history as well, with whoever wants to start.
School, which were both pretty diverse high schools here in the Valley. But I did go to college in Kentucky, and I will say Kentucky is probably the first time I experienced, or actually it was a few experiences in Tennessee, but that was when I saw that at least racism as I had learned about in textbooks against whites and blacks were very, very prevalent still. And little did I know that later on in life that I would be raising a beautiful black daughter.
And you're married to Thomas?
Thomas.
I thought we were
That
going
one.
to block that, yeah. My name's Thomas. I am not from Phoenix, as you know, you don't sound this good being from Phoenix. So I grew up in North Alabama, and with all that came with, I was born in the early 80s. And so for what shocks most people, racism was still a very active thing, even organized and carried out in very public ways in that setting. And I moved to Louisville, where I met Allison, and then being a Cardinals fan convinced her to move back to the desert. And then, as she mentioned, we adopted a daughter who looks nothing like either one of us to act so much like us. Yes.
All right, I'm Julia. I grew up in California, and then when I was 12, I moved to Western Kentucky, and so went from a very diverse setting. I had a ton of biracial friends growing up, and then moved to Western Kentucky, where I was one of the few mixed people in a predominantly white culture. And then I went to college in Western Kentucky, and then I moved to Phoenix to work on the Native American reservation. So I have different, all sorts of different backgrounds and I guess diversity in my life in all different types of ways. So, yeah.
When you guys moved, did you experience culture shock, and what was that like?
Allie and I had, in some ways, culture shocks moving to Louisville. Technically, Louisville is in the South, but if you were born in the South or you are from the Northeast or even the Midwest, you do not claim Louisville. It doesn't feel like anything. It feels like its own unique thing. It was a shock for me in the exact opposite way. It was a shock for Allie, in that moving from Phoenix to Louisville and me moving from small rural North Alabama to Louisville, we actually had a conversation where we were talking about how different Louisville was from home. And at the same point, we said, it's so, and she said small at the same time that I said big. So that's when I realized I need to see this Phoenix place. Like if this girl thinks Louisville is small, because there were definitely times when I first got to Louisville, I would have like small panic attacks of like how large it was. And I wasn't ready for that. Like that was not what I was from, not what I was used to.
I think
What part of Western Kentucky did you go to?
Murray. So I went to Murray State.
Oh, okay, yeah.
She's up.
No Murray, yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Sorry,
You're good. Yeah, so I definitely experienced some culture shock moving to Western Kentucky. Like I said, it was normal to have friends from biracial families in California, and then moving to Kentucky, it was just like so weird, like being surrounded by like white people all the time. Like, not that I didn't have white friends in California, like my mom's white, so half of my family is, but to just be the minority was definitely a shock, or being, the only mixed person in your American history class. And so everybody's like talking about slaves, and everybody's like, Julia, like we're talking about slaves, and you're like, yep, I'm sitting here too. So yeah, definitely a culture shock for me, and going from big city to rural. I mean, well, where I lived in California wasn't a big city, but it was definitely bigger than small town Murray, Kentucky. So
Yeah, when I moved, I thought I was quite shocked. I did find it to be pretty small because I was born and raised here, and I have a pretty eclectic group of people in my life. And going there, we went to school with this guy named Bobby, and he was what everyone would then call the token Black guy, because there weren't a ton of Black people living on our college campus. And it just blew my mind, because I'm like, I went to high school where I was probably like 30% of the population in my high school, going to a place where I was a part of the majority there. And it was very eye-opening and it was just very strange to see that there was still almost like a classism about it. And I think there were times I was just completely shocked, which is funny because Thomas said he thinks Phoenix is far, like has experienced more like racism here in Phoenix, where I feel like I experience a lot more. I call it the South because I don't know any different, but that was my experience in Kentucky and in Tennessee. And I went home with one of our classmates for Thanksgiving once, and her grandpa asked me, because he kept just calling me brown, and then he was like shocked that I was educated. I don't know. It was a very odd experience, and I just sat there like my brain couldn't process it, and it was such an out-of-body experience for me, and it's not something I feel like I've ever experienced before in my life. And I think that's when I first started saying, oh, I always felt like here in Phoenix that racism wasn't a big deal, and I just didn't realize the whole world wasn't like that, and it was odd.
Yeah, do you want to talk about that a little, Thomas?
Yeah, so it's not just the alley that I say I've seen. I try not to say I've experienced, right, being the white male in really any context in America, right? I'm not supposed to have experienced most of these things, but I've seen, because that's what most of racism stuff is in my life, is I've felt like an observer to it. Phoenix, what I see more of in Phoenix is back home, back in Alabama and growing up, and even now when you see it, people understand when they're being racist and that they're not supposed to be. So they will do it, you know, in hushed tones or behind closed doors, or they won't like it. They'll think it, but it'll be couched in this Southern niceties, right? So almost like the idea that my wife learned, like "bless your heart" is not a positive saying in the South. That was like the worst thing my grandmother could say about one of my friends, like, "Oh, Chad, bless his heart," and I'm like, "Oh, she thinks Chad's an idiot." That's what it is. And that racism, like insults and, you know, any type of negative is couched in just niceness and being polite, when racism is in a lot of the ways the same way. It is made to look nicer and not be as mean. When I got to Phoenix, all of a sudden people were blatantly racist to each other, like just straight out, and it was accepted and it was normal. And then, you know, I start talking to people like, how could you say that to someone? They have no idea. So it was almost a shift of one culture that knew they were racist and they knew they weren't supposed to be, but they were. And even if they were okay with it or not, that's the way it was. To when I got to Phoenix, it was a lot of the people I was watching were racist and things and had no idea. Like they had no idea that view was basically, they were dismissing someone entirely and just outright without having any idea who they were or what, just based on, you know, color of skin or what, you know, their last name may be or whatever. Like they're done with them, and like they don't realize, no, that's a bigger issue, and you think you're not because you're not in the South. And so, I mean, that was a big shock when I moved to Phoenix to find those situations and to look at my wife and go, there's more here than I've ever seen, like growing up, which is probably not too true, but it's very different. It's a different context of how it's done, and I think the lack of awareness in it.
I think I would agree with that a little bit in Phoenix, that people say things without like knowing that they could offend somebody by saying that. And so I don't know what you've observed, whether it's people being blatant and using the N-word, or if it's people just saying dumb things like growing up in an Asian culture. And my family and people I know have said things that are like, basically that they don't want to associate with people of other colors, whether it's a class issue or, you know, different things like that. For example, like Metro Center Mall is pretty diverse and rough currently, I would say. Like the socioeconomic feel of that particular mall is probably lower income. And so when I was a teenager, it still wasn't like, it was pretty rough, I would say, at that time. And my mom would be like, don't go to that mall. And I'm like, it's a mall.
Those were my stomping grounds. So that's why I was like, oh, it's diverse. I don't know. I don't experience anything weird. And then growing up, my mom's best friend's husband is Chinese, and they owned a Chinese food restaurant. And so even now when we're out to dinner with our daughter, she calls our friend Harlan, Uncle Harlan. And man, we could really confuse a waiter when they look at the table, and he wouldn't, all of the terms are very familial with each other, despite the fact that we are all very different complexions across the board as we all sit down. And so when Thomas brought that to light, I'm like, oh, that's okay. Maybe I was in my own bubble here. And I just didn't realize some of it, because growing up, I really didn't think it was that prevalent around here. So it was interesting to have that point of view just from someone new coming in.
What have your other experiences been with racism, whether in Phoenix or just from your past as well?
Well, I think the first time for me, I heard somebody say the N-word, I was like, oh, you're not allowed to say that. Like, well, how is that acceptable? And nobody flinched, and I was like, okay. And it was just accepted, and I was like, no. Do you guys know that's not appropriate? And I think that was like a very for me, the South was just very eye-opening because there were so many things that were just accepted or talked about, and it was just common knowledge. And I was like, I don't think I'm too PC, but I don't think that's like common. I don't think that you're supposed to be saying that about people. And with our daughter, thankfully, we've had pretty open conversations about race. And in her mind, she thinks Thomas has the worst of it out of all of us, which is funny because according to society, he's a white man. But according to our daughter, he's pink, and that's goofy. and he gets burnt by the sun, so he has it worse than anybody else. So it's been very interesting to try to have some of these serious conversations with her when she keeps just pointing at Dad, and she's like, "You're pink," and that's weird. And yeah, so I don't know. Kind of.
I think that's cool that she has a lightheartedness about it, though.
Yeah, we're part of what we've had to teach her during this time frame, because she doesn't feel affected by it, but it's something where it's like, well, we have to kind of prepare her, even if she's not going to be raised by it, to be sensitive that not everyone is going to treat her like we've treated her. And but so far, when the riots and everything were going on, she was more concerned that somebody was going to burn down her favorite Subway shop, and she just couldn't get past the fact that there was violence over it. And she is so sweet and naive about it. She was just like, people are different colors. It is what it is. Why are we arguing with each other? Don't burn down my, like, she was almost in tears, like, somebody might burn down my favorite place to eat or where I can shop. I'm like, no, babe. Okay, so it's bigger than that. Yes, that might happen. But like I almost felt like we were trying to convince her, like, no, this is a big deal. You need to take notice. You have to understand there's a lot about your culture that you need to know and come to appreciate so you can understand certain things. And that's been odd for us to be white parents trying to teach that. So I've had to rely on a lot of my friends for resources and different ways that we can incorporate her culture around the house and in our lives. So that gives us kind of a springboard in some of those conversations, because she is a very sweetly naive about it all, which is cute now, but I don't want, when it's older, for it to be an issue.
How old was your daughter when you guys adopted her?
She 8,
Okay.
because we adopted her in August and she turned 9 in September. So 8.
Okay.
Yep.
We met her 6 months before that, so we knew her at like 8.5. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
We're going on 3 years. So.
Yeah.
Awesome.
When I know Allie and I, we struggled a lot, like before we ever met Anaya, to try to prepare to what would we do if we adopted a child from another race. We were open to that. We were fine with that, right? So the question for us was, how would we help that child understand where they were, or like what their history from that race was, like what culturally they could, how could we help them understand a culture we didn't know? And we had a conversation with a man I knew that I had actually, I think I had cared for both, at least one of his children in a preschool that I was working at our church. And he is an African-American guy, married to an African-American woman. So his kids, they're completely, just black kids. There's no like trying to figure out different cultures. This is where they both come from, where both families come from. That's just what it was. And in like a side of a conversation, we just expressed to him that, we were even considering, I think we led into it by saying changing churches. And he like stopped us, he goes, and he was like, just be good parents. Your kids will figure it out. And he kind of, you know, as he and I would continue to talk, he would explain that he had to figure out, even his own person, what part of any culture he was going to accept. You know, and he even pointed out that me being from the South, I had to figure out what part of the Southern culture that I grew up in was I going to take forward into my adult life and pass on to my children, and what part was I not? What part was going to stop with me and what part was going forward? And he's like, and he pointed out that his kids were having to do the same thing. That, you know, he had his kids in a certain culture. They were around white people more than black people. And so they had to figure out what part of the culture they were taking and what they weren't. And he really helped kind of settle me in that if we were loving and good parents, she was going to have to, no matter what we were able to give her or not, work through these things the way. All we could do is help her process them. And so I worry less on what of her culture we're going to like bring to her, and more like, gosh, I kind of wait for the day when she actually is concerned with any of it to actually help her work through some of that. Because right now it is this innocent, naive, this isn't a big deal, I don't want to worry about it. It's more of a joke to her because she picked up from grandmother when I said something about being a white boy that, no, you're not white, you're pink. And it's all a big joke to her right now. So we'll see how that goes going forward with her. But it's I think it's a unique position, like being both completely white parents of a biracial daughter, that I feel like we could easily get sucked into this place of feeling like we always missing it, right? Because we don't even know enough of, we're not even 100% sure what culture, or what, we've got a pretty good idea, but we're not 100% of what she would be getting if she was still with biological parents. So to try to even guess at that would be almost an impossible, just asking to be anxious all the time. So more to just parents trying to help her.
Well, and he also warned us that at this time, we didn't know who our daughter was going to be, or our son. At that point of foster and adoption, there were no profiles, only the fact that we had said, you know, we're open on ethnicity. He had warned us, you know, a couple things, that there's rampant racism within the Black community itself. So even if we were strong and supportive, it would be controversial that she would have white parents, or he, no matter what. And just being able to provide a steady foundation and love was going to be the most important thing that we can do, and to teach her how to respond to that. And even if we ended up adopting, which was a scenario, a biracial child, just understand that some of the Black community will consider her not Black enough, and some other community will think of her as too Black, or Black period, because that will be part of her makeup. And so he said, you know, just be prepared, have honest conversations, make sure that representation in her life is important. But he goes, and you can ask any family and you're probably going to get different advice on how to handle the culture issue or how to raise her, because I can survey my family and some of them will tell you I'm too white. And he goes, and that's because of my diction. He said, the way I speak, I've heard it from my own cousins. And he was like, sometimes, he goes, you just don't know. You don't know what you're going to get involved with. And he said, just be open-minded, learn, be open to education. And like Thomas said, be good parents. Just be good parents, because most likely there will be a time in their life that it's going to be tough and you need them to be able to just rely on you. Be good parents and love them.